I would feel very weird if I reviewed the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy without reviewing the original trilogy of films that put Sam Raimi on the map. So let's get into it. For the last 3 reviews I'm going to be doing this week, I'm going to be taking a look at the Evil Dead trilogy, directed by Sam Raimi and stars Bruce Campbell. So we're going to kick things off with The Evil Dead, which came out in 1981 and was one of these super low-budget independent movies. And Sam Raimi made this when he was 22 years old. So that's very impressive for this to be one of your first movies. But anyway, the movie is about as simple as it can be. It follows 5 college students who go out to a cabin in the middle of the woods, and before you know it, this demonic evil force starts haunting the cabin, possesses a couple of the college students, and before you know it, each of them get killed off one after the other. It's the quintessential cabin in the woods movie, long before Cabin in the Woods came out in 2012. So unlike Dawn of the Dead and The Thing, I have seen the Evil Dead trilogy beforehand. I actually watched it sometime after I watched Cinemassacre's Monster Madness when James Rolfe covered the Evil Dead movies, because these movies just seemed so bizarre and so crazy, and they were pitched to me as horror comedy that I was like, yeah, I want to see this. And that's really important to note because the franchise as a whole has been pitched as a horror comedy series. But with the first Evil Dead, if you go into this movie thinking it's going to be a horror comedy, you couldn't be farther from the truth, because watching it both times, for my first time years ago and then again for this review, I didn't think there was anything comedic about it at all. Now, that doesn't mean that it's bad at all, because you gotta take into consideration that this is the first movie. This movie didn't really take an identity until the sequel, Evil Dead 2. So with this movie by itself, it's just a horror movie, and a very effective one. Because it's very low budget, it has a very gritty and grim look to it. It reminds me very much of the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where the cinematography just looks so raw. And maybe it's because the transfer on the Blu-ray that I have is not in the best shape, but I think it lends to the horror and the atmosphere of the entire movie. And as I mentioned, this is the quintessential cabin in the woods movie, and because you have these 5 characters stuck in a cabin with no way to get out, the only way they have to escape is through a bridge, which collapsed. They're just pretty much trapped. They're having to deal with this horror, trying to figure out how to kill it, or at least survive until the day. And you feel like you're with these people. All the characters feel very natural. None of them are complete idiots. Well, one of them is. I'll get back to that a little later. But you feel like you're with this group and you're just wanting this whole thing to end, especially when it gets to the point when some of these characters get possessed by the Evil Dead. And it can lead to some very brutal moments, especially considering that this movie was so low budget that a lot of the actors did get hurt, and it just makes it all that more believable. Now let's talk about Bruce Campbell. Ash is considered to be one of the most iconic figures within the horror genre. He's a badass, he's an asshole, and he's just got a chainsaw for a hand. We all know who Ash is, and Bruce Campbell has really embodied that role. But in this movie, he's just a regular guy. He's just a regular college student who's pretty much the brains behind everything. He's the hero of the bunch. And he doesn't spew all the one-liners that you would think he would. He doesn't have the badass attitude that he has in some of the other movies. He's just a regular guy. And that's something else I think people need to be aware of if you're watching this for the first time, is that you're not going to get a horror comedy, and Ash is not the same Ash that you see in the future movies. But that doesn't mean the movie's bad at all, because I'm sure this was made without the idea that this was going to turn into the huge franchise that it ended up turning into. So for being just a horror movie, it's very effective. And the ending does leave me with a very uncomfortable feeling, because throughout the whole movie, you see this spirit or this thing going around through the woods, but it's all from the camera's point of view. So you never know what it is. It's pretty much the Evil Dead. And at the very end, just when Ash is the lone survivor and he thinks everything's done, that Evil Dead comes rushing towards Ash, grabs him, and then it cuts to credits. So it just kind of ends in a very unsettling way. And I think overall, I really like this movie. I don't quite love it because there is one character in this movie, Scotty, who just gets on my damn nerves. And once he got the boot, I was like, Yeah, I don't care about this guy. I care about everyone else but you. And when you really think about it, Scotty's attitude is pretty much the attitude that Ash would consume in the future movies, even though Ash ended up being a little more likable in the future movies than Scotty did in this one. But in the end, The Evil Dead is worth seeing in your lifetime. It's a really effective horror movie. It has a great gritty look to it and some very cool camera work, though not as over the top or creative as in a lot of Sam Raimi's other movies. So I definitely recommend this movie, but with the caveat that you're not going to get a horror comedy, and Ash in this movie is not the same Ash that we've seen in all the other Evil Dead properties. So just be warned. It's really good, but you need to know these things before watching it. And that's my review for The Evil Dead. Tomorrow we're going to be looking at its superior sequel, Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn. So until tomorrow, I hope you enjoyed this review. Leave a comment down below and tell me what your thoughts are on The Evil Dead, if and when you've seen it. And as always, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you there's only one.